Hello there, and welcome to Lawson Literature, Episode 4. And in this episode, I will be reviewing the book Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. Steal Like an Artist is a how-to book by Austin Kleon, a man from Texas who describes himself on his website quite quirkily as a writer who draws. Indeed, his book is jam-packed with illuminating and often humorous illustrations which make his work here come alive as a simple, no-nonsense guide to the bare bones of creativity. Now, I'm really excited about this one, so I just want to dive straight into the quotes here. Chapter 1. Steal Like an Artist. On page 9, Kleon says that, quote, every new idea is just a mashup or a remix of one or more previous ideas. Here's a trick they teach you in art school. Draw two parallel lines on a piece of paper. Then ask yourself, how many lines are there? End quote. And I just wanted to do this now, just to show you the point he was trying to make. So there you go, drawing two lines on a piece of paper. You can see that. And what you've got here is, you've got two lines, but you've also got a third line, which is in the middle of the piece of paper. And this goes to show that something seemingly original and unique is actually made up out of other things. And actually this leads me straight on to the episode's object of the day, which is a bowl of Bombay mix. Yeah, that's right, you guessed it. It's a collection, Bombay mix, if you've never tried it before, it's kind of a collection of different bits of food. You've got kind of these nice sort of stick things. It's very delicious. But you've also got like a mixture of things. And you've got seeds, kind of nuts and larger nuts. And you've got these kind of like these green pea things as well. And basically what happens is all these combine together. I just want to have, it's really delicious. Yeah. It's good. Basically, all these combine to form one unique thing, even though they're a mixture of so many different things. And what Kleon's trying to say here is that basically nothing is original. Even though it might seem original, it all comes from different sources. And so he encourages you yourself to sort of get your inspiration from other things, from ideas and things like that. So on page 15, he says, chew on one thinker, writer, artist, activist, role model that you really love. Study everything there is to know about that thinker. Then find 3 people that thinker loved and find out everything about them. Repeat this as many times as you can. Climb up the tree as far as you can go. Once you build your tree, it's time to start your own branch. End quote. And that's really exciting, that idea that actually you create your own family tree of influences. And also what's particularly exciting is that, say you take, I don't know, say your heroes, say your hero was, I don't know, Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan also had his influences. So not only would you be influenced by Bob Dylan, but you'd be influenced by the influence of Bob Dylan, who was Woody Guthrie, for instance, who influenced Bob Dylan's work. And so you keep on, and in turn, Woody Guthrie was also influenced by someone else. And what's really cool is when you can I do this on Wikipedia sometimes. I look at my heroes that I find really inspire me, like Townes Van Zandt, the songwriter, and kind of look at all his influences. I think he was influenced by Tchaikovsky actually, and the Rolling Stones, and you kind of go back and you see, and you see this creative lineage, if you like, is probably the best word for it, and so it makes you kind of feel less alone in a world, in a creative world, if you like, where you do feel quite alone, that you're surrounded by all these masters who are kind of guiding you on. On page 19, he talks further about this sort of idea of getting inspiration. He says, quote, "You have to be curious about the world in which you live. Look things up. Chase down every reference. Go deeper than anybody else. That's how you'll get ahead. Google everything. I mean everything. Google your dreams. Google your problems. Don't ask a question before you Google it. You'll either find the answer or you'll come up with a better question." End quote. And that's a very good, very telling quote for the age we live in right now, where basically everything is on the internet. I mean, obviously not everything is on the internet, but all information is on the internet. So if you're trying to if you have a question, like, how do I make sushi? You can type that in and into Google, and no doubt you'll come up with millions of examples, of very clear examples of how to make sushi, and your question will be answered. So, instead of even asking anyone else about it, you can already have this source for finding things out. And Google is perhaps the best sort of search engine for that. I mean, obviously there are other search engines if you like, but Google's particularly kind of efficient for finding out anything you want to know. Anyway, let's move on to the next chapter. Chapter 2. Don't wait until you know who you are to get started. On page 27, Kleon says, "If I had waited to know who I was or what I was before I started being creative, well, I'd still be sitting around trying to figure out myself out instead of making things. In my experience, it's in the act of making things and doing our work that we figure out who we are." End quote. And what I love about this quote is that it busts this kind of really intimidating idea that's often spread around, that you have to start off with your own voice, especially if you're a writer, if you like writing like I do, and you struggle with this idea that you kind of have to start off with your own voice. And I don't have a voice. I'm not born going, oh, this is George's voice. This is my voice. It's just my voice is obviously influenced by the English language, which I learnt off my mother. Well, they say mother tongue, don't they? So that the English language is something I stole from somewhere else and used it to help form my own voice. And so, nothing is original in that sense. You have to get your voice from elsewhere, and the way to do that is to start being creative. You have to start being creative before you even think about who you are or what your niche or what your style is. The only way you're ever going to find out your niche or your style is just by getting on with things, just by doing things. On page 36, Kleon says, "I once heard the cartoonist Gary Panter say, if you have one person you're influenced by, everyone will say you're the next whoever. But if you rip off 100 people, everyone will say you're so original." That's the end of that little quote there. And then the quote continues later, and he says, "The reason to copy your heroes and their style is so that you might somehow get a glimpse into their minds. That's what you really want, to internalize their way of looking at the world. End quote. And yes, you have to internalize their mindsets. And the only way to kind of internalize the mindsets of your heroes, of the people you look up to, remember your family tree, so get out your family tree and look at it. And with those heroes, the way to sort of interpret their mindsets is to actually start by kind of copying their work. You have to make copies. You'll find yourself after making these copies. You don't find yourself, as I said with the voice idea before, that you don't have your voice to begin with. Your voice comes after stealing things. You steal the English language if you want to express yourself through the English language. But if you want, then you steal a painting technique. If you're a painter and you want to do a painting, you have to, you're not just born with an individual style of painting. You have to steal the ideas of painting from other sources. And that's the last point I want to make in this chapter. Chapter 3. Write the book you want to read. On page 46, Kleon quotes, says, the question every young writer at some point asks is, what should I write? And the standard answer is, write what you know. This advice always leads to terrible stories in which nothing interesting happens. And then on page 47 he amends this, he comes up with a solution for this by saying, quote, the best advice is not to write what you know, it's to write what you like. Write the kind of story you like best. Write the story you want to read. The same principle applies to your life and your career. Whenever you're at a loss for what to make next, just ask yourself, what would make a better story? End quote there. And that's a brilliant point, really. You can't just write what you know, because otherwise it could just be really boring. What you know is only a part of who you are in a way. You're way more than just what you know. Knowledge is only a little part of it. You are the sum of everything you love. And what you love cannot necessarily be expressed through knowledge. And I suppose that's what he's saying here on a kind of deeper level, if you like. But on a more practical level, you just want to write the story that interests you. If you really like sci-fi movies, I actually happen not to, but if you like sci-fi movies and that's really your thing, and you've come across a lot of people like me who say sci-fi movies are a bit rubbish, you've got to forget about people like me. And you've got to forget about all those naysayers and just go for it. Write sci-fi and show people that sci-fi movies are the best thing in the world. Show them that sci-fi movies are great. Actually, this is probably something Alien did for me, actually. I thought sci-fi movies... I was under the opinion that sci-fi movies were quite bad until I watched Alien. That sort of 1970s movie with John Hurt in it. And when I saw that, I realised that sci-fi has so much potential to kind of expand our curiosity about the universe through fiction. And yeah, that's what happens when you just... You got to go with what you love, not what other people tell you is going to be interesting. It's got to be what you personally find interesting. That's why it's important to set time aside. Literally, just get a timer for about 30 minutes and just brainstorm, come up with ideas about what you love in life. And I think you'll find that the ideas you come up with are kind of unique to you, that they might have similarities with what other people like, but you'll find yourself in that if you spend time pondering what it is that you specifically love to tell as a story. Chapter 4. Use your hands. Page 54. You need to find a way to bring your body into your work. Our nerves aren't a one-way street. Our bodies can tell our brains as much as our brains tell our bodies. You know that phrase, going through the motions? That's what's so great about creative work. If we just start going through the motions, if we strum a guitar or shuffle sticky notes around a conference table or start kneading clay, the motion kickstarts our brain into thinking. And this, end quote, and this quote reminds me of something I saw Jan Martel say in an interview on Big Think. For those of you who don't know, Jan Martel is a novelist who wrote The Life of Pi. And he said that writing's a very cerebral profession, whereas you get other kind of professions like like being a guitarist or an artist, making a sculptor, making something out of clay. It's very hands-on, but something like writing is a bit more something where you're stuck in your head quite a lot. And so particularly when it comes to writers, I think this is particularly important, to use your hands, get moving. Even though writing's my main sort of thing, I still do things like play guitar whenever my head gets stuck, or I'll go walk out in nature or something and embrace the leaves and the sun and everything, and just getting moving, if you like, or just do some exercise. I remember actually seeing an interview with Jimmy McGovern, who's a screenwriter, British screenwriter, and he said that whenever he gets stuck writing his scripts, he'll go out on a jog. Running is his thing, and when he comes back from the jog, his mind will just be so fresh because he would have got the blood moving, got the blood pumping, and everything. And there's also a way, to do with writing, to do it as well. Is like I think every writer should practice free writing. 20 minutes a day, just non-stop writing a kind of stream of consciousness thought. Time yourself for 20 minutes and just write down a stream of consciousness thought, and you'll be surprised that actually it becomes more coherent and sort of meaningful, if you like, as you get into the flow of it, if you like. So yeah, that's the first sort of hands-on quote. And then on page 60, Kleon talks about having two workstations, having the what's called the analog workstation and the digital workstation. So he says, quote, "If you have a space, set up two workstations, one analog and one digital. For your analog station, keep out anything electronic. Take $10, go to the school supply aisle of your local store and pick up some paper, pens and sticky notes. When you get back to your analog station, pretend it's craft time. Scribble on paper, cut it up and tape the pieces back together. Stand up while you're working. Pin things on the walls and look for patterns. Spread things around your space and sort through them. Once you start getting ideas, then you can move over to your digital station and use the computer to help you execute and publish them. When you start to lose steam, head back to the analog station and play." End quote. And I like this idea of having two workstations. Unfortunately, my room's I've tried to do it in my room, but quite small. But if you have a large enough room, try and separate your workstations in two. Have all your analog stuff in one place, and then have all your digital stuff in another, so that you don't get caught up in one thing. We in today's world, internet-driven world, we need to have a digital presence. We need to have an online presence, I think, which is what he's saying. You need that digital space to kind of show yourself, to publish your work. But when it comes to kind of just practicing and getting going in the morning, you want to be doing analog things. You want to be doing hands-on things. Getting some sticky notes, writing things down, coming up with ideas. I'd say even get a whiteboard. Actually, I don't think you mentioned that. Get a whiteboard, because that means you can just run things off and draw new things on as well. And that's particularly useful because it's right there. It's really present, that kind of thing. So take his advice on that. Chapter 5. Side projects and hobbies are important. On page 67, Kleon says, creative people need time to just sit around and do nothing. I get some of my best ideas when I'm bored, which is why I never take my shirts to the cleaners. I love ironing my shirts. It's so boring. I almost always get good ideas. If you are out of ideas, wash the dishes, take a really long walk, stare at a spot on the wall for as long as you can. As the artist Mayra Coleman says, avoiding work is the best way to focus my mind. End quote. And yes, very true. We just need time as creatives to do nothing. And by the way, let's just sort of, when using this term, get this clear, when using this term creative, I mean everyone, because everyone is operating from a space in their life where they should be creative with whatever they want to do. So when I'm saying the word creative, yes, I mean you. So yes, for anyone, we all need time to just sit around and do nothing. Because doing nothing is that kind of blank slate, if you like, is that blank canvas from which we can dive in and actually do something. It's a bit like why I do meditation quite a lot. I do meditation, 20 minutes to 30 minutes a day, because it gives me that point that springboard I can leap off. Without that springboard, I wouldn't be able to leap off anything, if that makes sense. You need that kind of space, that headspace of nothingness from which something can arise. That sounds quite spiritual in a way, that idea. On page 72, Kleon says, it's so important to have a hobby. A hobby is something creative that's just for you. You don't try to make money or get famous off it. You just do it because it makes you happy. A hobby is something that gives but doesn't take. While my art is for the world to see, music is only for me and my friends. We get together every Sunday and make noise for a couple of hours. No pressure, no plans, it's regenerative. It's like church. Don't throw any of yourself away. Don't worry about a grand scheme or unified vision for your work. Don't worry about unity. What unifies your work is the fact that you made it. One day, you will look back and it will all make sense. End quote. And yes, you may not know why you do certain hobbies. I do. I often worry about this, that everything I'm doing with my time should be towards one goal that I'm trying to get to in the future. But I think it says somewhere else in the book that you can't connect the dots looking forward, but only backwards. And that's very true. You can't. You don't know what might come of a certain hobby you're doing, or you might find a way to link your hobby to your main passion in life. For example, with me, because my main passion is writing. It's not like I just write all the time. That would be hell. I need to do other things. I need to play my music. I need to draw. I need to take photos and put them on Instagram. I need to read. I need to socialize with people. I need to see the world. I need to walk in nature. I can't just do that one thing. I'll go insane. And interestingly, all these different things influence my writing. So, for example, with my music, the poetry and the lyricism in some of, say, Townes Van Zant's songs, who I do lots of covers on, and I go to the open mic at my local bar every Tuesday, and I play some sort of folk country songs that I really like, Bob Dylan type songs, and that really informs my writing. It informs the poetic side of my writing, if you like. So, and as you grow old, as she says, as you grow older, you'll look back and you'll realise how important all these hobbies were, even though you had no idea where they were leading. Chapter 6. Do good work and share it with people. That's the secret. On page 79, Kleon says, quote, "If there was a secret formula for becoming known, I would give it to you. But there's only one not-so-secret formula that I do know. Do good work and share it with people." It's a two-step process. Step 1, do good work, is incredibly hard. There are no shortcuts. Make stuff every day. Know you're going to suck for a while. Fail, get better. Step 2, share it with people. Was really hard up until about 10 years ago or so. Now, it's very simple. Put your stuff on the internet. End quote. And yes, that's a very telling thing about our modern day culture, which is so obsessed with the internet. If you want to show something nowadays, you can just post it up onto Instagram or YouTube. It's like me right now and Lawson Literature sharing my passion for all these different books I'm reading, and I'm just putting it out there. Literally, it doesn't have to be anything massive. It doesn't have to be anything huge. It can just be a quote you read somewhere. Say you read a really nice quote, just share it on Twitter. Say you recorded a song, share it on SoundCloud. There are so many different ways to share your work online now that there really is no excuse for keeping your head in the sand when it comes to showing your work. And he is quite right in saying that this is the key to becoming known. It is the secret, in a way. 7. Geography is no longer our master. On page 90, Kleon says, "If you're not into the world you live in, you can build your own world around you. Now would be a good time to put your headphones in and cue up to the Beach Boys song, 'In My Room.' Surround yourself with books and objects that you love. Tape things up on the wall. Create your own world." Franz Kafka wrote, "It isn't necessary that you leave home. Sit at your desk and listen. Don't even listen. Just wait. Don't wait. Be still and alone. The whole world will offer itself to you." And Kafka was born a century before the internet. End quote. And yes, I really like this idea of creating your own world. And it's quite an exciting idea that you even if you're in a horrible place, even if you're in prison, for example, some of the best writers and artists have probably come from prison, because they were trapped in a cell somewhere they didn't want to be. But maybe they got hold of a book or two that they really loved, and then they just worked on that book. They got insights from that book, learnt things that they had never learnt before, circled passages from the book. Maybe they had a journal and they wrote in the journal. They might have to the point where they might have written whole novels just in one jail cell. The imagination is not limited. We know that. And if, for example, I'm a bit of, as you can tell with Lawson Literature, I'm a bit of a fan of books. I'm a bit of a bookworm, and I just want to show you. In my room, I have lots of different books that kind of show my kind of interest in literature. And no, I obviously don't read all these books at the same time, but I still kind of I like to look at the books, and they kind of, all the colours of the covers and everything, they give me a lot of inspiration for my own work, and all the titles on the sides of the books, they constantly inspire me. So just having that around me gives me a sense of me, in a way. You need to, in a way, it's almost like being reminded of yourself in that sense. On page 94, Kleon continues on this point. He says, your brain gets too comfortable in your everyday surroundings. You need to make it uncomfortable. You need to spend some time in another land, among people that do things differently than you. Travel makes the world look new, and when the world looks new, our brains work harder. End quote. And yes, you've got to get out of you've got to get out of the house. So as well as create your own little world, it's important to get out. It's important to see new things. What might seem foreign could just be down the road from you. It's not necessarily in another country. You don't have to book an expensive flight to Thailand. You can just go somewhere it's fairly cheap to get to and fairly nearby, but it is a completely different world. Immerse yourself in new landscapes. That's how you're going to kind of train your brain, the creative part of your brain, to function. It's all psychology in that sense. Chapter 8. Be nice. The world is a small town. Here, on page 101, Kleon makes the point and says, make friends. Ignore enemies. There's only one reason I'm here. I'm here to make friends. End quote. This is especially important in today's age, I think, of the internet, where your whole life can be shared. Nothing's really held back. Parts of you that are embarrassing can easily be taken from the internet unless you kind of really hide it well. And even then, it can still be shown. So, the internet's a very social place. Our current world is a very social place. And yes, this is a good thing in the sense that everyone's making friends and it's a great social environment. But it can also lead to bullying, and it could also lead to enemies. Just know that if you do have a bullying kind of approach, if you want to take advantage of people, just know that your kind of internet presence won't last for very long. It won't be respected. It's not really tolerated, that kind of attitude, just amongst people in general, because people in general don't allow for that kind of thing to happen. People respect each other, and not only that, but they admire each other. And this sort of leads me on to Kleon's next quote on page 115. He says, I put every really nice email I get in a special folder. Nasty emails get deleted immediately. When those dark days roll around and I need a boost, I open that folder and read through a couple of emails. Then I get back to work. Try it. Instead of keeping a rejection file, keep a praise file. Use it sparingly. Don't get lost in past glory, but keep it around for when you need the lift. Praise others for their work, which you admire, and never forget to reference them when referencing their work, is the sort of the point Kleon is making in this quote here. Never forget to sort of thank someone for what they've given you. Sometimes, if you're really grateful to an inspiration of yours, like a hero of yours, write to them, write a fan letter or something. It doesn't matter if they don't get back. Just show your appreciation somehow, and in turn, people will appreciate you. It's like, give and you'll receive sort of thing. People will appreciate your work if you appreciate theirs. That's how respect works in that kind of way. So respect really is the word that really kind of sums up this chapter. Chapter 9. Be boring. It's the only way to get work done. On page 119, Kleon says, I'm a boring guy with a 9-to-5 job who lives in a quiet neighbourhood with his wife and his dog. That whole romantic image of the creative genius doing drugs and running around and sleeping with everyone is played out. It's for the superhuman and the people who want to die young. The thing is, it takes a lot of energy to be creative. You don't have that energy if you waste it on other stuff. End quote. I absolutely adore this quote because it debunks this myth about creativity that you have to be some sort of kind of wild, adventurous poet guy on drugs who joins the 27 Club and dies at the age of 27. You don't have to be that to be creative. In fact, if anything, it hinders your creativity if you do stuff like that. And this quote always reminds me of the Gallagher brothers, who kind of formed the band Oasis in Manchester. And when they split up, I found that you could tell that Noel's work was a lot better than Liam's. I mean, obviously that's subjective. Some people might like Liam's stuff. But I thought that Noel's High Flying Birds had a lot more kind of quality to it and was much of a better listen than listening to Liam's Beady Eye. And you could tell that basically most of the work in Oasis was done by Noel. I mean, Liam did some, but the thing is, the point I'm trying to make is that Liam tried to sort of present himself as the kind of cool guy, as the cool creative who was doing drugs and, getting laid, going to parties, etc. Whereas Noel was that kind of quiet, wise creative who spent time practicing and honing his ideas and honing his vision for Oasis and his vision for music. And I think that's why Noel, in the end, came out as more successful than Liam. But obviously that's a subjective opinion, but I'm just using that point to illustrate what I mean by this cliche about creativity, about creatives, that you have to be wild in a way. You don't have to be wild. It's better to be ordinary. And on page 129, he talks about keeping your day job. So 125, sorry, he talks about keeping your day job, and about working an ordinary day job with your creative passion, as though it's a kind of double life. And he says that, quote, the poet Philip Larkin said the best thing to do is try to be utterly schizoid about it all, using each personality as a refuge from the other. And yes, it's this kind of symbiosis in a way of, you've got your creative life here, which is kind of quite, it's quite extravagant within its context, obviously. But then this creative life is surrounded by this very ordinary life. It's almost a bit like Spider-Man or Superman. Spider-Man is an ordinary guy in real life, but at night or when trouble's afoot, he has to change suddenly into a Spider-Man costume and be a completely different personality. Of course, that's a very radical example, but that's almost what it's like with creativity, is that you have your creative passion on one hand, And that is probably, especially to start with, when you're in obscurity and you're not very well known, that's going to be a separate part of your life, and you have to nurture that like a baby almost. On page 129, Kleon talks about keeping what's called a logbook. And he says, a logbook isn't necessarily a diary or a journal. It's just a little book in which you list things you do every day. What project you worked on, where you went to lunch, what movie you saw. It's much easier than keeping a detailed diary, and you'd be amazed at how helpful having a daily record like this can be, especially over several years. The small details will help you remember the big details. In the old days, a logbook was a place for sailors to keep track of how far they had travelled, and that's exactly what you're doing, keeping a track of how far your ship has sailed. End quote. And yes, I like this idea of having a logbook. I actually, personally, ever since I started reading Still Like an Artist a few years ago, I've kept a logbook which has kind of been on and off. But whenever I look back on it, I admit the memories flood into my brain like they would never have done if I hadn't recorded just very specific events like I phoned that girl, or I ate a sandwich under the tree. I remember I was on work experience in Poole and I ate a sandwich under a tree, and the memory is so vivid, and I think it's because I wrote it down that I remembered that specific detail. Memory works in funny ways, and if you have a logbook, like sailors do, to keep track of how far their ship has sailed, it springs back. These memories just simply leap back on you like they would never do unless you recorded it. And this ties all the way back into this supposedly boring, ordinary life, which is in fact extraordinary in its own way. And chapter 10, creativity is subtraction. On page 137, Kleon says, in this age of information, abundance, and overload, those who get ahead will be the folks who figure out what to leave out, so they can concentrate on what's really important to them. Nothing is more paralyzing than the idea of limitless possibilities. The idea that you can do anything is absolutely terrifying. End quote. And yes, you've got to restrict yourself to certain materials, to certain ideas. Otherwise, saying you have everything in the world will just destroy your creativity. You won't be able to get anything done unless you limit yourself. And that brings me nicely back to the prison cell example. If you're stuck in a prison cell and you've got nothing else to do with your time, then write a novel, and you'll probably write a really good novel because you haven't got all these distractions. And like it says, in this age of information overload, Facebook, YouTube, it's all good for showing your work, and it's good every now and then to go on for social purposes, etc. But you need to cut off that digital world. Turn your phone off for a while. Set a good hour aside just to read a book, or something like that. Play the guitar, or even just make a really nice sandwich or something. Do something that's where you're going to be totally absorbed by the present moment and not by these very kind of commercial distractions that are kind of thrown around on the internet and all these different sort of things in the social world, like gossip and all these tabloid newspapers and things you can get sucked into. It's very easy to get sucked into the general flow of society, and you've got to have that kind of willpower to kind of just unplug yourself from that. On page 138, he continues, he says, the right constraints can lead to your very best work. My favourite example? Dr. Seuss wrote The Cat in the Hat with only 236 different words. So his editor bet him he couldn't write a book with only 50 different words. Dr. Seuss came back and won with Green Eggs and Ham, one of the best-selling children's books of all time. End quote there. And isn't that just an absolutely brilliant, brilliant example of how limiting yourself can fire that creative brain? If you don't have much to work with, you know, if you only have a green pencil to work with, it's actually blue pencil, green from afar. But if you have only a blue pencil to work with, then you will figure out all the creative ways you can use the colour blue. Maybe you can draw the sea, the sky, I don't know, and use the gaps in between the blue as another sort of tone. But you'll find creative ways to use one material. Just try it. Try with, instead of thinking, oh, I need these paints. Oh, I just need to buy this thing, and then I can start my work. No, start your work now with what you have, and you'll be surprised at how much you can do. All right, and that sums up Steal Like an Artist, or the quotes. I'm now going to kind of move on to my opinions of the book now. And I want to kind of start this section by saying that you may have noticed how practical Steal Like an Artist is. It's a lovely little book. It's nice and small, so you can carry it around with you. You know, it's not too long. And if I were you, I would, well, firstly buy the book, but go further back in this video and kind of pick up on some of the exercises that Kleon gives. If you do them, then they won't just get your artistic juices flowing, but they will transform your entire approach to your purpose in life, whatever that may be. And another point I want to make about Kleon's work here is that he debunks so many myths about what it means to be creative. You know, that it's not just for an exclusive, gifted cohort of people, but for anyone at any level. And as such, I'm going to kind of conclude my review here by saying that this is the most accessible book I have ever read. The wisdom is so timeless that it can apply to any person or thing that wants to inject creativity into their lives. And it's possible for anyone, for you. All right, that's episode 4 of Lawson Literature. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay around for the next episode, which will be coming along soon. Thank you very much for listening.